Welcome to TIDES. I'm your host, Shveta Malhan, and today we are diving into the heart of HR transformation with someone who's not just been in the room, she's led the charge. Malvika Jethmalani is a three-time CHRO, founder of the Atvis Group, certified executive coach, and a champion for people-first growth in the age of AI. Malvika's career has spanned industries, continents, and transformations. From navigating M&As to building HR teams from the ground up, she's seen it all and done it all. Today, we are unpacking her journey and exploring how HR leaders can show up as strategic partners to the CEO, especially in a world where AI is changing everything about how we work. So let's get started. Malvika, welcome to TIDES.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today, Malvika. And let's start by learning a little bit more about your dynamic journey. You've been a three-time CHRO, you've been a founder and a coach. What's that one experience that has most shaped how you see HR's purpose in the business today?
Early in my career, I did some consulting work. And as a result, I was exposed to many, many different cultures. And I was fortunate that at a very young age, I had access to a lot of senior executives in my client companies. And I saw two kinds of leaders, ones who would only talk to HR when something went wrong or they wanted to let someone go, for example. And then I saw other leaders who would partner with HR every step of the way, ask HR for their counsel and advice. And they recognized that every decision in their business impacts their people. And they also recognized that most challenges are people challenges. And I noticed that more often than not, in the case of the latter, those companies just ran smoother. People knew what was expected of them. People were held accountable. I also noticed that both the business leaders and HR were less stressed out when HR was seen as a business partner and not as a function that kind of exists to push the payroll button and administer the benefits and clean up whatever messes the leaders make. And sometimes I feel that the more things change, the more they stay the same. So my point of view on HR's purpose hasn't actually changed all that much, believe it or not. I believed then, and I still believe that HR is one of the most strategic functions in any company. I think HR's purpose is to help you develop a talent strategy that will enable your business strategy. And of course, it's also HR's job to execute flawlessly once that strategy is agreed upon and you have alignment. So to me, I think HR's highest purpose is to be an integrator of complexity, to bring clarity, to bring alignment, and of course, humanity to times of ambiguity and change, which we are in the midst of a lot of that right now. And so, as business strategy evolves, so must your talent strategy. So, I think that HR is not here to protect the status quo. I think we're here to shape what is next.
That's very beautifully said. I also wanted to unpack with you uh, your journey and how it has helped you see and perceive the experiences that you've had in your CHRO role in a variety of organizations. And I asked this question because HR is one domain where people come into this domain through different lived experiences, through different functional areas. Not everybody studies to become an HR professional and an HR leader. And you have stepped into a variety of non-HR roles, like you've been an interim CFO and a COO. How has that journey shaped the way you approach HR strategy?
Being in those seats, it made me ruthlessly focused on value creation. When you sit in a CFO seat, you stop thinking of, at least I did, I stopped thinking of HR as a function and started thinking in terms of enterprise levers. So talent is a lever, culture is a lever, your decision-making speed is a lever. And so the way that I think about it is I build HR strategies the way that a COO would build an operating model, integrated, measurable, and ultimately anchored in business outcomes. And the other thing I'll say about that is we talk a lot about building moats, like a technical moat, but not enough people talk about culture as a moat. And I think your culture can be your strongest moat because, especially now, as access to technology and tools becomes democratized and competition will only intensify in that type of environment. So if your tech and your product are becoming sources of competitive edge, you can still rely on your culture to play that role if you have a strong culture in the first place, that is. So I don't think culture can be replicated easily. It's unique to every team and every organization. Every company has a culture, but very few have a culture that is deliberate and consciously designed and curated. And we inherently understand that in HR, but taking on other roles only reinforced that notion for me because the more time you spend outside of HR, the more you realize that, in fact, most of the challenges faced by leaders are related to people and culture.
Yeah, that's so true. And how do you see AI putting even more pressure on the people and culture aspect as we see AI bringing seismic shifts for organizations in many aspects through many dimensions?
So many things to say on that. I feel like that is a topic we can have hours of conversation about it. It still won't be enough, but I'll give you some thoughts, and I would love your thoughts on this too. I think that we have to ask ourselves some important questions as we design work and workplaces for the age of AI. I think we have to ask ourselves, are we optimizing for productivity or are we optimizing for purpose? So, what I mean by that is, as AI takes on more of the sort of cognitive labor, the tasks left to humans will increasingly be those that are rooted in judgment and creativity and ethics and emotional intelligence, right? So the kind of soft skills are going to become power skills in the age of AI. They will truly be differentiating factors for talent. The other thing that we need to ask ourselves is, how do we nurture these skills that machines can't replicate? And are we training and rewarding these capabilities, or are we still promoting based on the kind of legacy of technical competence
Hmm.
as we used to in the past? Because you and I both know, in so many companies of so many different shapes and sizes, people who are great individual contributors tend to get promoted into leadership roles.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have to leave that mindset behind. And then we're going to have to ask ourselves, how are we rethinking leadership and governance and decision rights? Are we preparing our leaders to lead in this age of AI where they're going to be expected to tap into the collective wisdom of human AI teams? And that's a different skill set. And we have to think about, what should the AI do versus what should the human do, and when should they collaborate? How do we shape the norms and the values and assumptions that get embedded into AI systems? And are our workplaces psychologically safe enough for people to navigate uncertainty and change with AI? And a lot of leaders say, yes, we want to create a psychologically safe environment. But when the rubber meets the road, it's very hard to create a space where your people can experiment and fail. And innovation, by definition, requires you need to have some tolerance for failure. So I'll leave it at that, but I would love to hear your thoughts too on this question.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love the key points that you touched on here because the way I see AI impacting organizations, first of all, it's not just implementing a technology into an organizational ecosystem. It's not like we were using, writing mail on paper and suddenly now we have Gmail. So not our learning curve in that situation was still relatively very easy because we were still doing the same activity of writing mail. It's just that our medium changed from paper to a word processor, and we had Gmail and other mail services that could do the work faster. But with AI in the mix, to your point, it is fundamentally going to change how we work in work context. The way the organizations look and feel might look very different too. Because here One, we are not dealing with a tool. I think we should all start looking at it not just as a tool, because when we frame AI as a tool, then we look at it doing pieces of work. Whereas if we look at AI as intelligence, then we can reframe our thinking towards more delegation. So how we work with technology is going to be very different. It's not just automation, it's working with autonomous decision making systems. So there, human and machine collaboration is going to be a very key ingredient in an organizational ecosystem. And the other point that I wanted to highlight, which I have lost my thought on now, because I wanted to build on to what you said, and it was the pressure it puts on the cultural aspect of an organization. Innovation, very important, but are all organizations ready to support innovation in their organization? I'm not so sure, because over the last few decades, we have conditioned ourselves to operate more like machines. You look at our performance management system, for example, it's going to measure output, it's going to measure efficiency, it's going to measure how many defects we've made in our workflow. So we were wired to operate more like machines. Now we are living in an environment where machines can be the specialists, they can do the work of a specialist. And now the whole conversation is changing towards how can we be more human in a work context and less like machine, which is a big shift for us as humans. Not that we can't do it. Being human itself is such a unique way to operate in work context. But the challenge is that we might have forgotten how to be humans in work context. So how do we bridge that gap, right?
Couldn't agree more. I think we need to be people led and tech enabled,
Mm-hmm.
and not the other way around.
That's right. How does this, like, if we just zoom in on the fact that we used to use tools and machines to do the work, now will use, and have started using machines and tools to do the work for us. How does it change the game for people experience? And how does HR need to think differently in this kind of scenario when it's fundamentally changing how humans operate in work context? We are going through a transition stage. We might not clearly see this shift happening, but if we kind of take 5 steps away from the situation and zoom out and see, it's fundamentally changing the nature of work. Organizations might look and feel different. Look at Instagram before Gen AI, pre-Gen AI era. It was a 13 or 30 people, 13 people company sold for 1 billion plus. What's stopping other organizations in the future to be more flatter, more nimble, more agile, and deliver value differently to their customers? And what impact does that have on humans in the organization and human resources teams?
This is such an important question. I think the two things that come to mind, that there's a lot of things that HR teams and CHROs need to do differently, but the two things that come to mind right away are working on our courage and our clarity. And I think these are especially important in times of ambiguity and times where the pace and volume of change will only continue to accelerate. So I think you need the courage to ask the hard questions about what is the business optimizing for? Are our leaders really ready for the change? Do our people have the right skills? And how, if not, how do we reskill and upskill? And then you need the clarity to translate the macro trends and into implications for how work is designed in your organization, how leaders are developed, and how your people strategy accelerates the business strategy. So I recently wrote about how the CHRO role is evolving. We saw the shift from CHRO to Chief People Officer. And I think we now maybe ushering in the era of the chief people and performance officer, where the head of the people function is also thinking about how do we tap into the collective wisdom of human AI teams? How do we prepare leaders to lead in this new era? And in recent years, if you look at kind of how HR has been evolving, HR teams have begun to apply design thinking and product management principles to the employee experience. And they started treating the workplace like a product, right? Iterating on it, measuring it, aligning it with the user needs. In this case, the user is the employee, of course. In the age of AI, I think this trend is accelerating or will accelerate. So, we used to gather in offices to do work. Now we gather on the internet to do work. So the digital workplace is now the primary medium through which employees engage with their organizations. Even in office-centric companies, teams are distributed. Work, largely happens online, and you have tools like Slack, Zoom, or internal, GPTs or productivity suites, etc. And these tools are the new conference rooms and the
Mm.
collaboration hubs and even the career pathways. And so what that means for CHROs and HR is CHROs now have to become the co-owners of the digital experience. And you're already seeing some kind of leading companies going in that direction, Moderna, ServiceNow. And I think that this kind of new era of work requires a deep partnership between CIOs and CHROs. And so we need to work with CIOs to design and implement and evolve these AI powered tools and technologies to enable the employee experience, not hinder it.
Yeah.
There was a recent survey that Deloitte did where they found that 30% of executives said that they believe to create better human and business outcomes, they need their CIOs to join forces with their CHROs to optimize for that human and machine collaboration and to help people work with AI. So I think those are just a few things that HR needs to work on and think about.
Yeah, yeah. I love that partnership angle between the CHRO and CIO or CTO in the organization. At the same time, I feel like that striking that partnership is going to be a little bit of a challenge for CHROs. And I say that because I looked at this research that Gartner pushed out recently, last few weeks, and where they did a survey of CEOs to gauge perception of how CEOs are seeing the AI savviness in their C-suite across all functions. The CHRO perception of CHRO AI savviness or AI readiness in the eyes of CEO was at a mere 7%. And that makes the CHRO an outlier in the entire C-suite, where a CIO might have a 43 to 50% AI savviness and CHRO has a 7% AI savviness. And if CEO has that perception, if we kind of transpose that as a perception in CIO's mind about CHRO, that will make that partnership a little bit of a bumpy ride. So how can a CHRO diffuse that perception or mitigate that perception so that that partnership can be struck in the most seamless, efficient, and fastest way?
I think, like I said earlier, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I think some fundamental truths about the CHRO role have still not changed. And through my executive coaching practice, I coach a lot of HR leaders, including CHROs. And one thing that continues to surprise me is how few HR leaders have strong business acumen and a strong understanding of the business in which they operate. So I think that the number one thing that CHROs need to work on in terms of their mindset shift is to think of ourselves as business leaders first and HR leaders second. And if you don't know your P&L inside and out, if you don't know who are our top clients, how do we make money? What does our unit economics look like? What does the competitive landscape look like? Then you've already lost the game before it's even started. And so I think in order to even be invited to the decision-making table, you need to come with a solid understanding of the business and extremely strong business acumen. Because if you think about it, it's so many companies, something like 60 to 70% of your OpEx is people related cost, right? And the CHRO is maybe not owning that line item, but certainly influencing that line item in a big, big way. So I think that's a great place to start. The other thing that HR leaders need to do is often we are the default ethicists of our organizations, right? So in order to continue to get invited to the decision-making table, we need to bring that, not just the business lens, but the human and the ethics lens, the kind of AI for good, responsible AI lens. And we also need to think about how is AI going to affect the work and the workplace. So, for example, AI has been positioned as this thing that's going to help us remove the drudgery from work.
Hmm.
I've talked about that. But if we're not careful, it might also remove the meaning from work, right? When work becomes task automation, we risk kind of hollowing out the parts of work that give people agency, that give people learning and connection. And I think HR has a responsibility to design work that's not just efficient, but also enriching. And this is a once in a generation opportunity for us to redesign knowledge work, and we can't afford to squander it. And so, as HR leaders, we need to think about how will we bring junior talent up to speed? If a lot of these kind of entry level tasks are going away, right? How do you bring junior talent up to speed? How do you then create future talent pipelines if so many junior jobs are disappearing? How can we borrow from the creative community to inform the design of knowledge work? How can we leave behind some of these kind of industrial era practices that you were alluding to earlier, right? And how can we help people create the time and the space, what I call strategic slack, to do their, because the worst thing that we can do is automate a bunch of the drudgery and then put people in more meetings and more context switching treadmills. And the last thing I'll say is, to successfully lead AI transformations beyond automation, we need to bring people along on the journey.
Hmm.
I talk about the IKEA effect a lot, which is this phenomenon that if you build something or if you are involved in the design of something, a product or a process, you're much more likely to buy in to its success and see it through. And so we need to bring people along on this AI journey such that they feel that it's being done with them and not to them. So as leaders, as HR leaders, we need to go to the place where the work is happening. We need to go to the front lines, and we need to encourage other leaders, our peers, to go to the front lines to understand the work before we can attempt to automate it, augment it, disrupt it, or bring in agents to take over that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that perspective because if we look at the past digital transformation efforts that companies have gone through and are still working on, I'm looking at, like my lived experience in the world of Oracle implementation, all the decisions and choices were already made about how we are going to operate in this new process. What does the new process look like? And then we bring people into the equation, and there is a heavy load on change management at that stage because management efforts, to your point, didn't start by involving people who are being impacted into decision making process. Change management efforts were when all choices and decisions are made. Now let's communicate with the people impacted and let's train them on how to operate in this new system, which to me is a very inefficient way also because now you're spending so much time, energy, resources on training and communication, which could have all been leveraged in other ways to bring people along from the get go. So, this is a beautiful time for us to also challenge our previous playbooks on change management, redefine what change management looks in today's day and age with this seismic transformation that organizations have to go through. And I also want to zoom into this point that you talked about earlier around CHROs owning the digital experience of employees, which is so interesting and fascinating because it speaks to the data dimension. People analytics is a newer capability in HR. It's not been around for very long. And I used to always wonder, why do organizations know more about their customers and not that much or not enough about their own people to make those informed choices and decisions? So how do you see data as, first of all, I should ask, do you see people data as a key lever for HR teams? And if it is, how do they go about leveraging it for making decisions and choices around things like reorg, designing orgs of the future, finding meaning and purpose for employees in their work as work shifts?
I think it's a very important lever. I think when we talk about data, a lot of people picture reports and dashboards. And of course, that is a part of it,
Mhm.
a very important part of it. But when used effectively, People data moves HR from being a reporting function to being a storyteller and a strategist. And it can help us speak the language of the boardroom. It can help us talk about risk and ROI, growth, and EBITDA, and customer lifetime value, and customer acquisition cost. And that is what the boardroom and CEOs want to hear about. That is what they care about. I've used data to demonstrate how onboarding quality directly impacted time to productivity, or how poor internal mobility or lack of career development initiatives was widening our succession gaps, or how regrettable turnover in one team was costing us millions upon millions of dollars. And that changes how executives view HR. When you start to use data to strategize and for storytelling, then suddenly HR is no longer a soft function, but more of kind of a force multiplier. So I think those are some of the ways that I've used data, and I do think it can be absolutely one of the most powerful levers as an HR leader.
I am so happy to hear that. And I think we should do a dedicated episode between us to just unpack the power of data and rethinking and redesigning what the future KPIs could look like for an HR team. Because I'm also sensing that if business leaders are thinking about how do we expand, how do we generate revenue, how do we redesign our business models, and here HR leadership is worried about shrinking time to recruitment and lifting engagement, then we are not speaking the language of the business, to your point, and we might not have that influence in those strategic decision making scenarios. So we will definitely do a deeper dive on that. Tell me more about the perception gap, because this is where I really want to unpack with you, because you have a very unique lived experience. You're not a CHRO that has grown through the HR route. You were in finance and accounting and then moved to HR. What challenges did have you had in your past roles, and what opportunities have you seen in your past roles which you think a typical CHRO who's grown through the ranks of HR may or may not see today?
I have so many challenges and so many hard-won lessons that I've learned the hard way. I think one of the lessons that I learned very early on is I used to think my work speaks for itself, right? And I realized, and this is true in pretty much every domain, not just HR, the more senior you get in your career, the more the relationships start to matter, the more your influencing skills start to matter. What we were saying earlier, right, about using data to for storytelling and to influence. And I I did not appreciate the importance of those things early on. When you have this mindset that the data speaks for itself or my work speaks for itself, you lose some important opportunities to collaborate with people, to influence people. I also had to learn the hard way the art of the meeting before the meeting. Often when you go to these kind of, board meetings or big executive offsite, the decisions for a lot of decisions are not made in those big meetings. A lot of decisions are made in the meeting before the meeting. And in the big meeting, you might formally ratify the decision, but it's really those sidebar conversations where the real work happens. So I learned to um, figure out who are the real decision makers, who has the CEO's ear or the board's ear, who is influential in this organization, who is going to be the difficult one who kind of pokes holes in everything that I recommend, and learning to bring those people along early on and get them on board, get their point of view before you go into the big meeting. So that was a very important learning for me. Another important learning for me was you have to be a little bit ruthless about how you build your team in terms of how selective you are in building your team. This might surprise some people coming from someone who's spent pretty much their entire career in HR. You also have to be very quick to separate people from the team or the organization the moment you realize that this is no longer a fit. Of course, you do the right thing for people, you give them coaching and development and feedback, but you get to a certain point where you realize, okay, now I've done everything and it's, there's still no way to make this work. And then it's time for a tough decision. And when you do make that tough decision, of course, you have to treat everyone with the utmost respect and preserve the humanness and the dignity of your people. But there are times when you realize what brought us here will not take us there. And that is a very, very important moment, not just for an HR leader, but for any business leader. And you have to have the courage to make those tough decisions. And that was a lesson that I learned the hard way, because as a young leader, I wanted to do the right thing for every single person and make everyone happy and protect everyone. And you realize very quickly that you simply cannot do that. You
Yeah.
can't make everyone happy. It's an impossible job, and you will surely fail if you try to do that.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like given what the world that we live in today, which is highly volatile, like VUCA on steroids, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. This term is not new. It's been around for many decades, but I call it VUCA on steroids because the
Oh,
intensity of all those have become even stronger. But having the mindset of figuring out who is on the bus and who's not on the bus as you go to solve the new mission, it's going to become even more important for HR teams. So down on that piece, I'm curious to know, I know there's no playbook right now for the changes that we have to solve, for the problems that we have to solve for that are coming our way, because for HR specifically, these are new challenges and new problems, which means that HR teams also have to be designed differently, rewired for solving those challenges and problems. What new capabilities are you sensing that HR leadership teams should be thinking about having in their teams today that they did not need in the past to solve for the challenges that they have to solve for?
absolutely. I think so. Again, this is one I would love to hear your thoughts on as well. But I think one thing we've already discussed, which is design thinking and thinking with product management principles in mind. I think that is one capability that I think is becoming more and more important. The other thing that I will say is, so the World Economic Forum released its 2025, I think it's called the State of Jobs report, a couple months ago. And one of the things that they did was they went and asked employers, what are the core skills that you are looking for in people? And the top skill was analytical skills. That was the number one skill. That analytical skills are becoming more and more important in HR. We talked a little bit about people analytics earlier, and I'm excited to dive deeper into that topic in our next session. So that is one thing. The other set of skills that they found were things like creativity, resilience, social influence, and leadership. So all of these things that we used to think of as soft skills. And so I think that in HR, we're in a very unique position because not only are we going through AI transformation within our own function, but we are now being put in positions where we have to help the CEO and the rest of the organization with the enterprise level AI transformation. So
Yeah.
I think the skills that we will need to drive those types of transformations will be things like influence, things like change management, which we all already talked about. We know from data that around 70% of digital transformations fail, and usually it's because of a lack of change management and communication. And so I think HR leaders are in a unique position to kind of help close that gap when it comes to leading AI transformation. So we will need to kind of hone those skills more than we've done in the past. And I think we will need to kind of dust off our org design textbooks and playbooks and think about how is AI likely to change the structure, not just the org chart, meaning the boxes and the wires, but how work actually gets done. How are decisions made? So in the future, if I'm reporting to you and my agent is collaborating with your AI agent and there's a disagreement among the agents,
Mhm.
which agent's recommendation gets implemented, right? We will need to think about decision rights in a different way. We'll need to think about work arrangements, including flexible and asynchronous work, in a different way. So I think those are just some of the skills. And then, of course, we talked about this idea that HR leaders tend to be the default ethicists of their organizations, right? So I think one area where we will really need to kind of flex our muscle is the area of ethical AI. We will need to be at the decision making table when ethics guidelines and guardrails are being set for AI systems, for AI agents, for reasoning models that are starting to come out. We will need to be the ones to highlight the risk of bias and to push our vendors and our internal teams to build safeguards such that we can protect against bias. And we will need to be the ones to push for transparency and explainability and accountability in these AI systems. So those are just some of the things that come to mind. But I would love to hear what you think.
Yeah, those are such good ones. I was thinking about where can I add new skills or new capabilities. And I'll give you a couple of examples. These are from my lived experiences. So I have Six Sigma background and I also have user experience background. And those are not the skills that I was chasing as part of my work journey, but they happened to be the skills that I had to apply given where my career was at that point in time. And last 3 4 years I have been able to go back to my lived experience and pull from the toolkit that I have organically developed to apply it in the modern context. Like Six Sigma was back in early 2000s and it was for continuous improvement, but it helped me see the process anatomy of the workflows. So to your point, if we have to redesign work, we first should be able to double click on a workflow and see who are the players in this workflow, who are the actors, who's doing what, who needs what information, how are the outputs of one person flowing as inputs to another person. So refreshing, or if you haven't played in that space, creating your own playbook for diagnostics for different pieces is going to be super critical, because once you speak the language of the business, you can go to the business or even in your own team. To your point earlier, has to support the business AI transformation, but to support that transformation, we have to transform ourselves as well as a capability. So how do we see the workflows that exist in our ecosystem today? How does work flow? Who is touching the workflow at what point in time? Where are the friction points? Where are the barriers? And then get into a conversation with all the stakeholders to say, does it make sense for this piece to be done by humans, or should we delegate it to a machine to do? Should we delegate to the machine so that it can make choices and decision, or should we just automate because we know that it's so black and white that there's no decision making required in that? But if we don't have the process anatomy, those conversations are going to be very hard and will take a lot longer than they need to. So brushing up on or learning those skills will be important. And the second one that I will add to the ones that you listed is understanding how the marketing team does the UX work. And I don't mean the user interface where the buttons sit, but understanding the human behavior in a process. Or like, what are people thinking, feeling, doing at different stages of the journey, of different actors in a process. Learn journey mapping. So all these are diagnostic tools in my language, because they help you lay the picture of what the current state looks like, so that then you can ideate better on what makes sense for a future state and tie it to the outcomes that we are looking for.
I love that. And I couldn't agree more. I especially love this point of applying continuous improvement and Six Sigma principles. I went through continuous improvement training a long time ago as well. And it's really helped me. I feel it helps you take a really complex process and simplify it into steps, and you can break down workflows, like you said. And that is something that we will need to do a lot more of in the age of AI, because we will need to answer the question of what parts of the work can AI handle versus humans, versus where do we collaborate? And something like continuous improvement or Sigma can really help you break that down.
Yeah, absolutely. We should do a dedicated episode. I did not know that you have Six Sigma background, so I would love to jam with you on that in another conversation. But as we wrap up today's conversation, what would be your advice for HR leaders who are listening to this conversation and are feeling inspired, but at the same time, they feel stuck between transactional HR work and they want to push for a more strategic voice? What's that one mindset shift you'd encourage them to make as they want to be more strategic and less transactional?
If I had to say one thing, I would just say work on your business acumen. Sit down with your CFO or your finance people and dissect your P&L inside and out. Sit down with your salespeople and understand the customer and who your customer is. Sit down with product and look at their product roadmap, right? So sit desk side with people or virtually with people and do a virtual, co-working session or what have you to really understand your company inside and out. Because if it was important in the past, it's even more important now in the age of AI and this kind of VUCA on steroids world, as you called it. So that would be my one advice to HR leaders right now.
Fantastic. Malvika, thank you so much for sharing your incredible journey and insights with us today.
Thank you. This was fun.
It totally was. And I'm looking forward to the ongoing conversations because this is not the only episode. You have so much to share that we decided that we'll break up our conversation into multiple parts so that we can tease out as much wisdom we can from your lived experiences. So thank you for your time today. And to our listeners, take Malvika's insights and see where you can put them into practice. Because whether you are a CHRO or a people leader, this is your moment to reimagine HR's role in the age of AI. So join us next time as we continue the conversation with Malvika. And I think where we landed is that in the next conversation, we will be doing deep dive into the power of people data and how it's changing everything in HR. Until then, keep learning and keep leading.